The guy looked me dead in the eye and said, "Construction starts Monday, Mr. Callahan. Honestly, there's nothing you can do about it." And the crazy part is, the man saying that was standing on my property when he said it. 3 days later, his entire little neighborhood project got frozen so fast it sent half the HOA board into panic mode, and one of them actually tried calling my daughter before calling me, which, to this day, still irritates the hell out of me. But to understand why that whole thing exploded the way it did, you gotta understand what that patch of land actually meant to me. Because to everybody else in Fairwick Cove, it was just some empty corner lot with grass on it. To me, it was 11 years of my life. See, my wife Nora and I moved into that neighborhood back in 2013 after she got sick. Nothing dramatic at first, just one of those slow-burning illnesses that quietly changes the shape of your life while you pretend things are still normal. We left Phoenix because the heat was rough on her lungs and ended up outside Asheville in this quiet little subdivision where everybody waved too much and the HOA sent passive-aggressive emails about garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 6 hours. Real charming place. But that corner lot beside my property, I bought it separately a year after we moved in. It wasn't expensive because technically it wasn't considered prime buildable land at the time. Drainage issues or some county nonsense, I don't even remember anymore. I just remember standing there one evening after work, looking at the trees swaying behind it, and thinking, someday I'll build a workshop here. Maybe a little guest house for my daughter if she ever wanted to move closer. Something simple. Until then, I took care of it myself. Every Saturday morning, same routine. Coffee first, black, no sugar. Old Eagles songs playing through a beat-up Bluetooth speaker clipped to the mower handle. I'd cut slow, nice straight lines across that grass like some old retired groundskeeper at a baseball stadium. Sounds ridiculous saying it out loud now, but there's something calming about watching chaos turn neat. Especially after Nora passed. That lot became the one thing in my life I could still keep under control. People in the neighborhood noticed too. Kids cut across it walking home from school. Neighbors would stop and tell me I kept it looking better than the actual community entrance. One guy joked I should start charging the HOA landscaping fees. Funny enough, turns out maybe I should have. Anyway, things started feeling weird around early April. Little stuff at first. 2 board members walking the perimeter one afternoon pretending not to stare at the property lines. A white pickup truck parked near the drainage ditch taking measurements. Then one Tuesday morning I walked outside with my coffee and almost dropped the damn mug. Bright orange survey stakes were hammered straight through the mowing lines I'd just laid down 2 days before. Not random either. Clean spacing. Deliberate. Like somebody had already made decisions without bothering to mention them to the person actually paying taxes on the land. I remember just standing there in my driveway staring at those stakes while my neighbor Diane came power walking past in neon pink sneakers like she always did around 7:30. She slowed down, looked at the stakes, then looked at me and gave me this awkward little smile people use when they know something you don't. "Oh good," she said. "You finally saw it." I said, "Saw what?" And she goes, "The HOA's new amenity project. Everybody's been talking about it at the clubhouse." I actually laughed at first because I thought she meant the empty common field near the mailboxes. Then she pointed directly at my lot. "No, right there. They're putting in a gazebo, pickleball courts, maybe a fire pit area." She kept talking, but honestly I stopped hearing half of it. It felt like one of those moments where your brain refuses to catch up because what you're hearing makes no damn sense. I said, "Diane, that's my property." And I'll never forget this woman shrugging at me and saying, "Well, maybe not for long," like she was discussing weather. That was the exact moment something cold settled into my stomach. Because suddenly all those weird little things over the past month started connecting together and none of it felt accidental anymore. That night, I skipped dinner, threw on my work jacket, and drove straight to the HOA board meeting at the clubhouse. And that's where I met Garrett Pike face-to-face for the first time since all this started. Now, you gotta understand something about Garrett Pike before this goes any further, because every neighborhood has one guy who mistakes a little authority for actual importance. And in Fairwick Cove, that guy was Garrett. Mid-50s, expensive golf polos, too much teeth when he smiled, always talking like he was pitching a timeshare nobody asked for. He'd been HOA president for maybe 4 years, but he acted like he was running a small country. The clubhouse meeting room was already half full when I walked in. Cheap coffee brewing in the corner, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, People pretending not to stare at me while absolutely staring at me. Garrett was up front laughing with two contractors in collared shirts when he noticed me coming through the door. You ever see somebody smile before a fight because they think they already won? That was his face. Russ, he said loud enough for the room to hear. Glad you could make it. I didn't sit down. Didn't grab coffee. I just looked at him and said, why are there survey stakes on my property? Room went quiet real fast. Garrett leaned back against the table like this was all some minor misunderstanding. Well, he said, dragging the word out. The board recently approved preliminary plans for an expanded community recreation area. I said, that didn't answer my question. He smiled again. God, I hated that smile. Your lot happens to sit in a very useful location for the neighborhood's long-term vision. Long-term vision. Listen to this guy. Like he was unveiling Disneyland instead of stealing somebody's land for pickleball courts. I asked him straight up if the HOA had filed anything official with the county involving my parcel number. He paused for maybe half a second, then said, nothing you need to concern yourself with right now. Right there. That's the moment I knew this wasn't confusion. It wasn't paperwork mistakes or crossed wires. These people had already moved pieces around behind the scenes and figured I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back hard enough to matter. I looked around the room and realized some of the board members suddenly couldn't make eye contact anymore. One woman kept shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. Another guy stared at the wall like it held the secrets of the universe. They knew. Maybe not all the details, but enough. Garrett stepped closer and lowered his voice a little. Russ, between us, the community really needs this project. Property values, family spaces, all that. You don't even use the lot for anything. I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because it was insulting. I mow it every week, I said. I pay taxes on it every year. That's called using it. He gave me this tight little grin and said, come on now, nobody's trying to take advantage of you. Which is exactly what people say right before they absolutely try to take advantage of you. I left before I said something that would and oppose. He got me arrested. Drove home angry enough I missed my own driveway the first time. And here's the thing people don't talk about with situations like this. Anger's easy. The harder part is that little creeping doubt afterward. Sitting alone at midnight wondering if somehow you missed something. Maybe there was some legal clause buried in HOA paperwork. Maybe county zoning changed. Maybe you're the idiot and everybody else knows it. So next morning I drove down to the Buncombe County Records office. Little brick building, smelled like old paper and dust and burnt coffee. There was an older clerk there named Teresa who'd helped me years earlier when I bought the lot. Sweet lady, sharp as a tack. I gave her the parcel number and said, can you tell me if anybody's filed development paperwork involving this property? She started typing, then stopped. Her eyebrows pulled together. That's odd, she muttered. 10 minutes later, she came back, carrying a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. And that's when the whole thing stopped being suspicious and started becoming unbelievable. For months earlier, the HOA had submitted a formal development proposal for a neighborhood recreation expansion project. Concept renderings, contractor bids, drainage studies, projected budget. Over $230,000 altogether. And buried right there in the middle of the application was my parcel number listed as designated HOA common use land. Not proposed acquisition. Not pending owner approval. They filed it as if they already possessed legal control of it. I remember staring at the paperwork while this pressure started building behind my eyes. Teresa noticed too. She quietly asked, did you authorize any of this? I said, hell no. She leaned back in her chair real slow and said, then somebody got real comfortable making assumptions. Turns out Garrett and the board had been pitching this project to residents for months. Community cookouts, increased home values, safer family gathering spaces. They even had these glossy little mock-up posters displayed in the clubhouse showing smiling fake families roasting marshmallows where my damn mower tracks used to be. And the worst part? Some of the neighbors genuinely believed the land already belonged to the HOA because Garrett kept talking about it like it was inevitable. Like ownership was just a technical inconvenience waiting to catch up with his plans. That level of confidence only comes from two possibilities, arrogance or desperation. Later I found out it was both. See, Garrett had been under pressure for over a year because neighboring subdivisions were building flashy amenities and Fairwick Cove was losing buyers. Less demand meant lower property values. Lower property values meant angry residents. And Garrett, being the self-appointed king of suburban paradise, decided this project would become his legacy. Problem was, he needed land. My land. And instead of negotiating like a normal human being, he apparently convinced himself he could slowly maneuver me into giving up, or maybe intimidate me with bureaucracy until I folded. What he didn't know was I was already done losing important things in my life. After Nora died, something changed in me. I stopped confusing politeness with weakness. So I took copies of every document, thanked Teresa, and walked straight out to my truck. Sat there for maybe 10 minutes gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm down enough to think clearly. Then I called my attorney, Daniel Mercer. Now Daniel's the kind of lawyer who never raises his voice because he doesn't have to. Old Southern guy, silver hair, talks like he's perpetually disappointed in humanity. I explained everything, and there was this long silence on the phone before he finally said, "Russ, do not speak to the board again until I see these documents." I drove straight to his office. He reviewed the paperwork quietly, page by page, occasionally making these little humming sounds that somehow felt more threatening than yelling. Finally, he took his glasses off and said, "Well, this is aggressive." I asked him if they could actually take the property. He said, "Not legally, but they've already created enough paperwork momentum that if you ignored this much longer, untangling it would and oppose become expensive." Then he looked directly at me and said something I'll never forget. "People like this count on hesitation." That sentence hit hard because he was right. Garrett thought I'd stay quiet because most people do. Most people avoid conflict until conflict owns the room. Daniel drafted one document that afternoon, a formal title dispute notice tied directly to the parcel and submitted to county planning and zoning. Under state law, any active permit or development process connected to disputed property ownership automatically triggered review suspension until the matter got resolved. One filing. That was it. No dramatic courtroom scene. No screaming match. Just paperwork. Cold, boring paperwork. Funny how that's usually what actually changes people's lives. Monday morning around 10:30, county enforcement issued a temporary stop order tied to the recreation project. Around 11, the contractor called the HOA. Around noon, the machine stopped. I know because I heard the silence from my backyard. And if you've ever lived near active construction, you know how strange that silence feels once the noise disappears. It was almost peaceful. Almost. Around 3 that afternoon, somebody knocked on my front door hard enough to rattle the frame. And when I opened it, Garrett Pike was standing there without that smug little smile for the very first time. Garrett looked like a man who hadn't slept since the stop order hit. Shirt wrinkled, forehead shiny with sweat, jaw tight like he'd been grinding his teeth all afternoon. For a second, neither of us said anything. We just stood there on my porch with the wind moving through the trees behind us and that unfinished silence from the construction site hanging over the whole neighborhood. Then he finally said, "You really went and escalated this thing." I almost laughed. Escalated. Like I was the one who filed development plans on somebody else's property. I leaned against the doorway and said, "Garrett, you tried building a community park on land you didn't own." He rubbed both hands over his face and lowered his voice. "Look, maybe some assumptions were made too early." "Assumptions?" I said. "You submitted county documents listing my parcel as HOA land." He started talking faster after that, which people tend to do when the ground under their story starts collapsing. Said the board believed acquisition discussions would happen later. Said the contractors got ahead of themselves. Said nobody intended harm. And somewhere in the middle of his little damage control speech, he accidentally told me the truth. "Do you understand how much money is tied up in this project?" There it was. Not community. Not families. Not neighborhood unity. Money. Pressure. Ego. Legacy. The whole thing had never been about building something for the neighborhood. It was about Garrett needing a win badly enough that he convinced himself ownership was just a detail he could bulldoze through later. I remember looking past him toward the clubhouse down the street where they'd hung those cheerful little project posters a month earlier, and honestly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I thought about Nora. About those quiet Saturday mornings cutting grass while she drank coffee on the porch wrapped in that old blue blanket she loved. About how many pieces of my life had already disappeared over the years without my permission. And something inside me just settled. Calm. Solid. I said, "You know what your problem is, Garrett? You spent so much time acting like that land already belonged to you. You forgot there was an actual person attached to it. He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the lot. The same lot he'd probably been picturing covered in benches and string lights and little HOA-sponsored wine nights. Finally, he sighed and asked, "What do you want?" Funny question, because people like Garrett always assume everything ends in negotiation, that everybody has a number. I said, "I want my property left alone." He nodded slowly. "And if the board agrees? Then maybe this ends quietly." Another long silence. Then he gave one stiff nod, turned around, and walked back down the driveway looking about 10 years older than when he arrived. Things moved fast after that. Faster than I expected, honestly. By Wednesday, the HOA attorney contacted Daniel offering full withdrawal of the parcel from the development proposal. By Friday, they agreed to cover my legal expenses, a little over $4,000 altogether. And the following week, they signed and recorded an official deed acknowledgement with the county confirming the property belonged solely to me with zero HOA claim attached to it. Permanent. On paper. Exactly where it should have been from the beginning. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because neighborhoods talk. Especially suburban neighborhoods where boredom spreads faster than gossip. Once residents found out the board had tried slipping private property into a development proposal without the owner's approval, people got angry. Real angry. Not everybody sided with me, of course. A few residents still complained the community project would and oppose VE increased property values. One woman actually told me at the mailbox, "You could have compromised for the good of the neighborhood." I asked her if she'd volunteer her backyard first. She stopped talking after that. But most people, they were disturbed by how quietly the whole thing had happened. How easy it would and oppose been if I hadn't checked county records in time. Within 2 months, 3 HOA board members resigned, including Garrett. Rumor was there were arguments behind closed doors about legal exposure and misuse of funds. One contractor threatened litigation over delayed work expenses. The neighborhood Facebook page turned into a digital knife fight for weeks. At one point, somebody posted drone photos of my lot with the caption, "This grass cost us $230,000. I'm not gonna lie, that one actually made me laugh. These days things are quieter again. The survey stakes disappeared. Construction equipment vanished. The fancy renderings came down from the clubhouse walls. And every Saturday morning, I still mow that lot. Same old mower. Same Eagles playlist. Same slow stripes rolling through the grass. Except now it feels different. Not victorious exactly. More grounded. Like the place means something new now. Sometimes I'll stop halfway and just stand there listening to the neighborhood wake up around me. Dogs barking. Garage doors opening. Somebody arguing with their kid about being late for soccer practice. Ordinary life. And I think about how strange it is that people can convince themselves they deserve access to something simply because they found a use for it. That's the dangerous part about entitlement. Once somebody builds a story in their head where your property, your peace, or even your dignity becomes convenient for them, they stop seeing boundaries as real things. They start seeing them as obstacles. Garrett never thought of himself as a villain. I genuinely believe that. In his mind, he was improving the community, increasing value, leaving behind something people would remember. But somewhere along the way, he stopped asking permission and started assuming authority. And honestly, that happens in a lot more places than neighborhoods. So now, whenever I see those clean mower lines stretching across that corner lot, I don't just see grass anymore. I see proof. Proof that quiet people aren't powerless. Proof that paperwork matters. Proof that sometimes the only thing standing between you and somebody else's ambition is whether you're willing to push back before it's too late. And I'll tell you this, if I had ignored those survey stakes for even another month, there's a good chance I'd still be trapped fighting this mess in court right now. So yeah, every time I hear somebody say there's nothing you can do, I think about that silent construction site and Garrett Pike standing on my porch looking like his whole world had tilted sideways overnight. Because sometimes there absolutely is something you can do. You just have to be willing to do it. Anyway, I'm curious where you land on this one. Do you think the HOA crossed a line? Or should private owners compromise more for community projects? And have you ever had somebody slowly try to take control of something that belonged to you while acting like they were doing you a favor? Let me know in the comments. Because judging by the messages I've gotten lately, stories like this happen a lot more often than people realize.